very much. And just while I wait for a couple more people to start, I just thought, and before I do this official start, as it were, Lucy and Stephen, I just wanted to ask you, how did you get into coaching? Why did you first start doing coaching, and what sort of attracted you to it? Lucy
I'll let
first.
Stephen go first.
Obviously.
Sure. So what started me off was actually somebody I was a business partner with alongside at Royal Mail many years ago. Had left or I'd left. That's right. I think I'd left. Or we both left Royal Mail, and she approached me and said, "I got this chap director in our firm. I've just got this really strong sense that you would be a really useful coach for him. Would you mind doing some kind of, in essence, pro bono work for a mate? This guy desperately needs someone to work through some stuff on. You've always thought you were quite skilled at that." And I went, sure. And so I went off and spent kind of 6 months with this chap doing some, I hadn't done my qualifications at this point, but I'd done enough in the HR handbooks and training guides over the years to kind of know enough to do it sensibly and safely. And it kind of lit a touch paper for me at that point. And I kind of enjoyed it, charged nothing for it, got really good results with client from it. He was one of my first kind of reference points when I then started doing it properly a few years later. And he was very, very glad to do it, which was lovely. It was really lovely feedback. But I think that first experience being asked by someone who saw it in me and said,
Mm.
come try, before I even took it properly seriously, was how it began.
Yeah, oh, that's interesting. So, yeah, as you say, somebody quite striking that somebody saw something in you and decided you'd be
Yeah.
good at it, and off you went. And hello, Haley, and
Hi.
and Lucy. What about you?
So mine was also when I was a business partner, and this was at Grant Thornton, and they did a whole program rolling out neurolinguistic programming with coaching, where they started at the partner level because they wanted to change their strategic direction and rolled it through. But in order to do it, they trained all the HR business partners in terms of the core elements that sat beside it. So we had quite an intense few days around understanding the basics of NLP, understanding the basics of coaching, and getting into that triad forming as part of that. And then I've done it quite infrequently through, but then particularly during the COVID period, I started doing my executive coaching qualification at Henley. Did the first week before COVID's hit, where we all actually came together for a weekend, and then the rest of the course went online thereafter because COVID was there. So instead of learning how to coach in person, I learned how to coach online formally,
Oh,
which is
that's
very different.
interesting. That might be yeah, might be something to explore later if we get time, because it's a yeah,
Well, I'm
that's
not
very
sure I could
interesting.
go back to in face anymore because I'm so used to
Oh,
doing it on screen that it's quite
yeah.
a different scenario.
Oh, that's just interesting. Oh, thanks, both. Sorry to throw that at you, but I thought it'd be quite an interesting place to start. So, welcome to this light bulb moment, which is, as you know, there's short sessions with a small group of eight Headspace members exploring a skill. Today, we're looking at coaching techniques for HR leaders, and we've got two CPOs with deep experience of that, as we've already heard. Very interesting. You both started when you're business partners, by the way, because we've got heads of business partners and senior HR BPs on the call. So, Lucy Graley is Director of People at Royal Park. There's a suitable image behind you. I love that. And Stephen Robson is CHRO at Copper.co. So, you're both very welcome. Both are passionate about coaching and its impact, and thank you ever so much for doing this today. Plan is to start with some input from both Lucy and Stephen. We've asked them for some stories and examples of where they've seen coaching make a difference, perhaps where it's not worked so well, perhaps where it has worked so well, that sort of thing. We'd like to hear some examples from you two on the call, or where you've seen it work, where you've used it after that. And then we'll stay in the round for this one. There's no breakout rooms. And if we have some time, we've got some further ideas from Lucy and Stephen, but we'll see how we go time wise, and we'll have a hard finish at 12 o'clock. So recording the session, as you know, and Lucy, I think you've got some slides, haven't you? Would you? The,
I did.
the floor
So
is
I
yours.
just
If that's
when I was thinking about the impact of coaching what's had on leaders, there was one thing as we were talking that jumped out, a bit of a framework, which I thought I would just share around how to get the best from starting a coaching conversation. And actually, most of these stories that I've probably got to tell is where some of these have become more important as we've gone through. So I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully, it's the right one and you don't get all of my emails instead. Um, but hopefully, is it going to come up
yeah,
properly?
perfect. No, yeah,
Is
beautifully
that it?
done. It is it. Yeah, that's really useful actually. So this is the
Um,
focus module you were talking about, wasn't it? Sorry.
Yeah, so I just thought very briefly as a bit of an introduction, just because then it helps with some of my stories later on, is when I was at Henley, they spent a lot of time talking about how you get the coaching conversation in the right place first. And they use an acronym there called Stokers, which I just thought I'd very quickly run through just because it might be useful or not. But what really landed home with me is for most of your coaching sessions, you've got an hour and a half, and to think of it a bit like a short haul flight Where if you think about when you go on a plane, that first 10, 15 minutes is really crucial to get you up in the air, get you going. And if you don't get it, you ain't getting up there. Then the actual flight can be really short. You even haven't had your gin and tonic before you're starting to come back down. And actually, that mental time to then come back down is as important. And so, thinking about your coaching in those three elements really struck home with me. And so, the Stokers element is about getting you up in the air and setting yourselves up for that best coaching conversation. So, it's an acronym, as everyone loves an acronym, so try and remember it. So, as you can imagine, you start off your coaching conversation with, so, what do you want to talk about today? What's the subject? And hopefully, your person has brought something to the table. But I think, as any great coach knows, you've sometimes go in a room, have a coaching conversation, and they haven't thought the foggiest of what to talk about today. So, the other next element is then putting some time around it. And again, for a lot of my coaching conversations, this is probably the first and foremost. So, we've got an hour together today. And what that and then allows you to do is as you're getting into the conversation, you can keep bringing it back to. So we've got 20 minutes left. What would you like to explore? But also really ring fence it. So if you've got somebody who loves a good warble and goes on and on and on, it really helps ring fence it. But if you've also got someone who's quite quiet and quite doesn't put as much into the conversation, again, it allows you to go, so we've got 15 minutes left. What else would you like to talk about? And so on. So that time bit for me is really paramount. The O is then the outcome. So actually getting people to think about what they want to leave that coaching conversation with. And really for you today, for instance, we've got this time till 11 o'clock. I've got my clock at 12 o'clock. I've got my time wrong. So what would you like to get most from this hour together? So you can see how it starts to come together in terms of the build up. This is then my favorite around, okay, so if you know this is what you want to get from your session, how are you going to know that you've got there? So, what is it from the session that you want to know that you've got there? But most importantly, how do you want to feel at the end? And just taking the time to explore that is, for me, has been really enlightening in quite a lot of my coaching conversations because it makes the hour quite practical because it could just be a conversation. It could be actually need to do something. I need to come out with a plan. I need to have something tangible. Or it could just be actually, I'm really needing to rummage in this and have a great talk out loud in terms of what I'm wanting to get from that outcome. But in particular, what do you want to feel by the end of it? So I've just done a coaching session coming into this, and the person was just like, I just want to feel lighter. I'm feeling really heavy at this moment, and I want to feel lighter by the end of the session. And so it's really good as you're going through your coaching conversations, then just come back and check in and go, well, how are you feeling? Are we starting to get towards that feel? Are we taking that one step forward? So you can really help then nudge some of the conversation. However, I would say if we do get talking about neurodiversity, asking people how they feel at the end might not be the best thing. So we'll come back to that one if we get onto neurodiversity. And then the essence is, so why is it important to you today? So why now? Why are you bringing this topic to the table? Why is it this thing that's in your mind right here, right now? And again, it gives some grounding for you to understand how urgent is it. You can then link it back to how do you know you're going to get there and you'll feel, and it starts to take you through. The last bit, as you're starting to come into it, is then recognizing your role as a coach and that partnership, and actually what do they want best from you today. And again, you've got all different methods at your fingertips in terms of, being able to use silence, being able to be the critical friend, being able to challenge. And just asking that question as you're getting into the coaching conversation just really allows you to make sure that you are going to be the best person in the room for them during that period of time. It also gives you that permission to be that critical friend, to challenge, to ask questions, because you're starting up front really with that partnership. And then last but not least, you might have covered all of that, but it's over to them. It's their coaching conversation. So where do they really want to start? So having spent the first 5, 10 minutes exploring what to get from the coaching conversation, you're giving them back the power in terms of, well, what's most important and where you start. And so these types of elements just then make sure that as you've got up into that cruising level, you're getting into your coaching conversation, you've got some things that you can come back with hints and tips as you go through, just to really make sure you're grounding the most from your coaching conversation. Give it a go. I'm very happy to share these afterwards, but some of these bits you can come back to as you're having that great coaching conversation to just make sure you're servicing your client best, but also you're getting the most from it. And so when Richard and I and Stephen were talking, I just thought it'd be quite a useful model to share overall.
It very
I'll
much
stop
is.
sharing my screen.
Oh, thanks, Lucy. Yeah, I'd love to see the slides. That's a real help. Just before I go back to you, Lucy, and ask for some examples of coaching from your career, what does the group think about the model? Is it the sort of thing that you would use or have used a similar version of before?
think it'd be helpful to just, I suppose, to frame the conversation. Gives you that kind of, I suppose, formal start before you launch into the kind of the meat of the discussion, I suppose. And like Lucy says, helpful to then maybe reframe kind of when you're halfway through to say, oh, actually, let's just check that we're going along the way that we need you or they wanted to at the start of the conversation.
Yeah, yeah, I like the timings point that Lucy made as well. When you were saying, Lucy, about the if you've got somebody who's quiet, you need to be careful of the timings. If you've someone who just talks a lot, you need to be careful of the timings. So in short, you need to be careful of the timings, which I sort of thought made a lot of sense as well. Thanks, Sally. Haley.
I was just going to say similar, really, that I haven't seen that before, but actually, I think having that structure would make it really useful. I think the examples that you kind of think of, it's more about the journey and the impact that you get to at the end, but I think that would be really useful to use.
Thanks, Haley. I like the analogy with the short haul flight as well. So Lucy, back to you. Sorry. Where have you used coaching in your career, and where have you seen it work well and perhaps not so well in some ways?
So I think there's many, but one that really jumps out is where I've had a CEO and an executive director just not on the same page as each other. And you end up in a coaching conversation with both parties in different directions, trying to find that harmony in the ground, but at the same time keeping the relationship between them and how they own it. So in particular, it was two men. I'm not going to go into specifics about which company, so you can't find them and hunt them down. But very much very bold, passionate in their management and leadership style, so often quite fiery. But what it then meant is that they couldn't hear one another. And what was quite interesting as we were going through the coaching and talking it through is it was kind of like the Tower of Babels, and they might have been speaking English, but not a single one that they couldn't hear each other. It was almost like they were speaking a foreign language to one another. And the power of the coaching conversation was very much around, okay, so this is what you've heard, but what are you interpreting? Where are you taking it? But more importantly, where do you think they may have been coming from as part of it? As much for the coaching conversation was about trying to create a common language, a place where they could come together to hear one another, but at the same time create that level of respect for one another where they could work it through. So it was quite an interesting dynamic of almost feeling like you're piggy in the middle, but keeping that coaching conversation to each party, but then allowing them to hear one another as they went through.
Did you end up acting almost like a translator then?
It felt like it.
Yeah.
It felt like a translator, but at the same time, you're trying to teach them a language. So you're trying to help them hear somebody else's language. So very interestingly, when you heard them both speak, one was very much more around touch and feels to use very sensory language in that sense. But the other party was very auditory, so everything was about hearing and things. So that's why the words they were using were not connecting, because they were using different sensory language as they were talking. So some of the coaching was also allowing them to use to play with using different words, articulating in different ways, so they could actually come to the common ground.
Oh, how interesting. So how did you, if they're that different, how did you get them to speak it? So I get the principle, but how did you do that indeed in practice?
So I think it's part of the coaching, isn't it? It's getting them to bring that real life example, and more importantly, as they brought it to the table in their own way, it's those questions around. So, okay, so this is what it feels for you, but where might it be coming from them? If you were in their shoes, if you were in their chair, if you were in their position, why might they bringing it to that to the table? And then just trying to help reframe into different language until they could get to a point of common understanding as part of it.
Oh, wow. How long did it take?
It felt like forever. I'm going to be really honest. But it is the point where bit by bit you could see the language change, and you could also hear in the meeting room over about a 6 month period the energy change. So it became less aggressive, less combative, to actually trying to be a bit more curious, a bit more understanding, a bit more working through as part of it.
Oh, what a great story. That's really interesting. Very interesting observation you made about the different types of language that was actually at the root of it. Please do raise your hand or just come in if this is anything that's if this sounds like something you've also dealt with or perhaps solved or are dealing with. Thanks, Lucy. And any other stories that you'd like to share in terms of maybe it didn't go so well or things where you think coaching isn't appropriate, for instance?
Um, I think there's often where people don't have that, what are they trying to achieve from it? And I think the hardest bit is when somebody comes to a coaching conversation and they haven't got a goal, they haven't got an aim in mind, and they're very much just trying to use the time. And what you both have to respect is it's respect on both people's time. So if they start the coaching conversation without a goal, how long do you spend trying to come up with one, or how much are you just trying to pull teeth in terms of what you're trying to get from it? So that's for me is when using that bit of a model is there anything we can actually explore here? Or sometimes you just have to go, actually, this isn't a great use of anyone's time. So maybe we don't do the coaching session today and we'll come back to actually what you're trying to achieve from it.
Okay, got you. I guess it might not be unknown that someone's been told to do some coaching and isn't necessarily bought into it, I'm guessing.
Well, they've just rushed in and they haven't had any time to think or prepare. And, sometimes it is just life is busy and there's something in the diary and they're thinking, oh, Christ, I haven't thought of anything today. I haven't got any problems I want to surface or work through.
Apart from being really busy. Yeah, no, fair enough. Thanks, Lucy. And Stephen, if I could turn to you. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll take a couple of different slants to try and build out. I agree with everything Lucy just said, and very common issues as well. So I started thinking about this from when it doesn't work and some of the reasons why and what I've been involved with. And a couple of examples spring to mind really clearly. One was somebody I coached, quite a senior executive in a very well-known British retailer. And about halfway through we had about 6 or 7 sessions booked for the year, about halfway through, and she was struggling with a particular point. And there's a point in coaching where you have to ask an unpopular question. In reality, you have to be able to confront something in as open a question as you can. And I'll never forget our session towards the last 20, 25 minutes of the session. We were about 2-hour meetings. I'd asked a very open question, which is what you're supposed to do, which is something along the lines of, can you think of anything else that is affecting your opinion on this? Or can you think of anything else that might be affecting the way you're looking at this right now, or what's happening for you right now? So just trying to keep it as what else is going on. And I was met with this kind of, not quite 20 minutes of silence, but 20 minutes of disconjecture. Someone who was clearly not very comfortable with what was now going on in their head. And it's easy sometimes to want to please your client, right? To want to ask a different question, take them somewhere else, do something different with it, take away that painful spot. And I left it. And I just left it. And we ended up closing the session on a relatively cold note, which is not normally how you'd want to do it. But you could tell there was someone there. So I had to hold my ground and say, this isn't the time. And we finished the session constructively and respectfully and all the good stuff you'd say. And we booked our next one in for kind of 6 weeks later. And what was interesting was the very first sentence that came 6 weeks later was something on the lines of, I said, how are you? My client said, well, terrible, all thanks to that question you asked me just before we finished last time, quite frankly.
Oh.
And actually what happened was I'd asked a question that had unlocked something that she wasn't dealing with at the time, didn't want to deal with and didn't want to do, which is part of coaching, is to ask the questions, to expect people to do that. And I was in a position where I had to, in essence, then hold my ground and say, that's why we're here. We're here to ask those questions. You came here with trying to unlock something. I've asked you a completely open question about what might be going on, and that surfaced something in you, and that's why we're here, is to talk about those things. And it was a lovely lesson for me, only because it would be really easy to say, oh, I'm so sorry about that. Oh, you're right, absolutely. Oh, we shouldn't have. But that was the very point of it. And sometimes you go to some places that are more difficult and not pleasant to talk about. And if you have a good enough set of boundaries written down, or at least discussed and agreed at the beginning, you should know that you're allowed to do that. You're being given permission to do those kind of direct questions. But equally, by the end of that, whatever that was, session 4 or session 5, by that point, we were back on an even keel. We kind of went through this dip, came out the other side, and by the finish of that next session, we were back into, oh, okay, I see. Now, my own reflection was, could I have asked that question any sooner in that session that hadn't left 25 minutes at the end? But the reality was, I didn't know what was going to come from a simple add-on to see if somebody had anything else to add. One of the most common coaching questions is there anything else you'd like to say about that? Have you got anything else to add? Hoping somebody just keeps exploring or digging a bit further, not knowing what they're going to come to next. But it was for me, it was interesting because it felt like something that hadn't gone well. So it felt like, this hasn't worked. I've done something not quite right. And I remember discussing it with my supervisor probably a couple of weeks later, and she said to me, no, that's why you're there. You're there to ask that question. You're there to ensure somebody has the support around them at any point. And my clients always have telephone service available outside of the sessions if they need to reconnect, look at something again afterwards. So they're never stranded, never alone. But if you're not prepared to ask the difficult questions because you want your client to stay friendly and jolly and happy with you for the whole time, then you're probably not going to be getting to some of the root cause of what you should be dealing with. So that was one. The other one I was going to briefly talk about, if I can, was as a CPO, when you're engaging with coaching, when you're booking coaches, it's never surprised me how often CEOs have come to me with so I've got a problem with John and John needs a coach. And how often the last thing John needs actually is a coach. And how often, certainly in the corporate world, coaching relationships can be set up for individuals that, quite frankly, don't want to be coached, aren't really interested in coaching, will go through the time of it to please their boss or to please the organization. In some occasions, will weaponize that very experience, their benefit, to try and say, well, I've done my coaching and now and therefore. And it often, I've just found in the past, it's often used as a easy way out of what might be a difficult situation when coaching isn't the right answer. And I've often seen CEOs do it when they potentially have been conflict averse, unwilling to deal with the leadership or management style of an individual that works for them, which is very much about that's unacceptable behavior around here. And instead has gone, I know, we'll get a coach to tell them that instead. And actually, my experience is that doesn't work, because it's the relationship with your line manager which often dictates the terms of how you operate and your performance. And often outsourcing that to a coach is not the issue. And Lucy was saying earlier about, setting those goals and the clarity around it, that normally for me is the point where you know whether or not coaching is the right solution. Because the corporate world is full of coaching assignments that are given to people, sometimes as a gift for development, sometimes as a correction course, and often they're not actually the intervention that's going to help. And I've met clients in the past and had chemistry sessions and walked away from work because it's not coaching work that they wanted, and you could see straight away that you're not going to be able to get an outcome, and actually your own reputation could suffer as a result of doing a coaching assignment that doesn't really work and doesn't get you any further. So there you go, two very different views of things that can be more difficult.
Yeah, both very pertinent, as were Lucy's. Thank you ever so much, both. That sets off very nicely for a discussion, I think, in the round. So please do raise your hand or just dip in. Let's start with, how do you use coaching yourself, or how does it work for you? How have you seen it work well?
Sorry, I just had a question. If
All questions.
So, I struggle with silences. Like, I find them uncomfortable, and I just want to. My instinct is to fill them. So, I suppose, Steve, you just said about the example. How do you hold your ground? And
so honest answer is, in a coaching session I was in myself, I want to say 15 years ago or more now, I got coaching for this very thing, because you can probably already tell I'm an extrovert. I don't stop talking often. It was very, very easy for me to jump in on all sorts of things, and holding a silence for me is and remains a real difficulty. And my coach worked with me with it until, and this is a true story, you may remember there used to be a thing called a VHS machine in the corner, or a CD player, and it had a little button on it with two stripes on it, which is the pause button. And in my coaching session, my coach asked me to figure a framework out that if I could identify a trigger, however uncomfortable it felt, I would consciously move into a different zone to control it. And so I created a pause button in my head. And so every time I find myself in a conversation where I need to just be quiet, I picture this black button with two white lines in it, and I press it, and I just stop. And it's excruciatingly painful for me. But then it just becomes repetition and practice. And of course, the more you practice, the more you then learn what comes when you do shut up for 5 minutes, because sometimes what you realize as a coach as well is how often you might be stopping stuff coming back to you, especially if you're coaching an introvert, somebody who's slightly less verbose. They need that space to think and to wait, and then they start to talk, and suddenly you get the reward for doing it. And so it's a self-fulfilling kind of practice after a while, but it was not easy, and it is a daily challenge.
Yeah. Could I add to that as well?
Yeah.
There's two other things that you can do. One, look at their eyes. look at where their eyes are. So if they're looking up, they're probably accessing memory and thought. So you can see in their facial expressions, are they actually trying to get more thinking coming through? And to Stephen's point around the first and the second level of consciousness, for people who are extrovert, they'll just blurt out and then they need to go to an extra level of thought. So look in the eyes and see actually, do you think they're trying to access more thinking? And then if you want some theory that sits behind it, there's a really nice book by Nancy Klein called Time to Think, and
Yes,
that is all about creating silence and creating space, and it gives you some of the theory if you need some of that theory that sits behind it.
In fact, I shared the Nancy Klein stuff is superb. I was fortunate enough to do a 2-day small group session with Nancy Klein. It helped me immensely, but the book alone is incredible.
Yeah.
What does it mean if they're looking down, Lucy?
So depending where people's eyes are, can see whether they're accessing memory or where they're thinking. So sometimes they're looking down, they might be accessing feelings, looking up. It's not all the same, but there is some theory around where your eye patterns are as to which bits of your brain you're accessing.
Great. Thanks. 2 great answers. Did that help, Sally?
Yes, thank you. I've definitely, I'll just like probably bulldoze in with an answer sometimes in like, not just in coaching sessions, but, you know, in team meetings, anything like that. And then you just become aware that you're probably stopping those that maybe need some more time or more space to formulate their thoughts and to reflect and come in. So it's just something that I've been quite conscious of, I suppose, over the last like 12 to 18 months, especially because I've taken on a new team who there's quite a few introverts in that team. So it's kind of making sure that they feel they have space to input.
Sally, one of the first things I got taught in my coaching training was the continuum between mentoring and coaching, where mentoring is tell and coaching is ask, and how you constantly moving that dial in any form of coaching sessions and setting it in different places. And what helped me most was actually asking people's permission as to where to set it, even during a session. So to stop yourself from potentially lurching into into mentoring, which is the tell part, is to say to people at times, if you deliberately ask lots of questions, is to almost, well, I actually do it physically. I say to people, can I make a suggestion? Would you like me to make a suggestion? If they say yes, I say, okay, let's talk about why you might want me to make a suggestion first before we add it in, because it's very easy to slip from one to the other subconsciously almost when you're enjoying a conversation and you've got something to offer. And you've got 10, 15, 20 years, whatever of experience behind you, most people have got something to offer and a view, right, which is formed as opposed to the coaching end of the continuum, which is open and inquiring.
That'd be helpful. Okay.
Yeah, cheers both. Great question, Sally. Like Sally, I hate silences, so help me here, people. Who wants to raise another issue?
I haven't used Zoom for ages. I can't actually even see how to put my hand up if I can, but anyway, I'll put my hand up.
Yeah, that's enough for us.
When you spoke, Lucy, about the Stoker's kind of map and actually asking, what is it you want to get out of this session and, how you feel by the end, if that naturally kind of goes somewhere else and actually that person feels, or you're getting from that person that actually they might have set out some goals, but it's changed in the moment, or they're kind of wanting to take it down a different path, would you actively kind of pull them back to, well, actually, we said at the session, would you kind of make note, or would you kind of let it be a bit more organic about where that conversation has happened to go? Or would you kind of just see how it kind of felt in the moment? I mean,
I think there's a bit of see how it goes in the moment because it's their coaching session, so it's entirely for them. You are just there to be the service of asking and partnering around the questions. However, if there's a good natural point, you might want to do, I just want to check in because when we set out, this is what you said you wanted. Can I just check, are you happy to carry on down the route we're talking about, or do you want to go back to that original one? And that's why some of that essence question is important, because it's like, why is this so important to you now and here? And if it's really important to them, it helps you then bring them back. So if you're coaching somebody, say, who has got ADHD and they've gone off on a tangent because that's what's happened in their brain, you can then use that and say, well, do you just remember you said at the beginning of the session this was really important? So can I just check, is this train just how your mind's gone, and do you want to pull it back, or do you want to carry on down that route as well?
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. I'm never really sure what to do kind of in those conversations, I think, because interrupting that person, if that's where they've wanted to go. But yeah, similarly, if you've had this really nice intro where you've set how they want to be feeling, and when they do it, obviously they'll get to the end and think, well, actually, none of that happened, and I don't feel the way I was hoping I would, and kind of what's our role with coaches. But I think that's helpful. Thank you.
What do you think, Stephen? Because that's a really good question, Nikki, and I like your answer a lot, Lewis, because it makes sense. Because, but it must be. I suppose what's in my head is what you're really saying, Nikki, is when do you intervene and when do you not? And obviously, to a great extent, it's contextual. So therefore, how much can you say of a general nature, I guess, in terms of
I think, look, what Lucy shared at the beginning is dynamite, right? Because structure saves coaching sessions from becoming a conversation about going anywhere. In theory, if you think about it in its clinical sense, someone is paying you, in theory, a sum of money to help them get to an outcome. You are already required to keep that structure and to interrupt where appropriate to keep it on track, to make sure they're getting what they want to get from it. I think it becomes your responsibility on behalf of them, and you can kind of contract that at the beginning as you use a model of that, which is, I'm going to keep a structure to this. I am going to pull us back if we move too far ahead. Are you okay with that? Most people should be like, yes, I want you to keep me on track. I want us to get to the right point. And I mean, Lucy would have done this in her training as well. There's 6 billion different coaching models for different kinds of ways of doing. They're all fascinating and amazing, and people find their own sets and they work brilliant. Once you've got your set and it works, it really gives you confidence. And I think success comes from having the simplicity of that and being able to use it and dip in and out to someone's session deliberately and overtly. It's actually quite reassuring to clients, I think, to receive it.
makes a lot of sense? I presume also you must have sessions with the same person that can have a very different character. One where you're perhaps letting them express more than normal, I guess.
It comes back to what they're wanting as an outcome, doesn't it? So if they want a plan, you're going to keep them focused to a plan. If they want an outcome to just think out loud, then who knows where you might end up.
Yeah, got you.
Sorry, Stephen, I spoke over you.
No, Stephen, what are you going to say? But that makes a lot of sense, Lucy.
Yeah, the other bit that because every client is so different, right? And you do end up retailoring the start. I mean, all of it is it's all bespoke. Ultimately, an executive coach, it's all bespoke, and so your ability to have those conversations early, to Lucy's point, to understand what is it that they want, and to make sure then you're applying the rules that they require for that journey, actually makes your life as a coach a lot easier. But people always ask, I remember doing some of my training, and people would say, how are you supposed to think of the next question whilst you're still listening to the answer you're getting? And that's what structure helps you with. It's because you kind of have a frame of where you're going and how you're going to take a conversation. So you can be both attentive and be forming where you're taking it and what the next question will be at the same time. And some of those models and those structures give you that backbone, actually, to be able to do that. And because each one is so different, and you might use different models with different people based on what their requirements are, you've still got something to use in the background, which gives you your science to the art, I think, a little bit.
Nice. It's all bespoke. That's a good line. Yeah, the focus. I don't know how the focus that coaches have. I think like you guys is really quite impressive, because what you also haven't mentioned, perhaps you're not prone to it, but is when somebody says something that is interesting and it relates to your own life or whatever, or just makes you go off on a tangent in your mind. I think, oh, that's really interesting. Oh yeah, we might have bolognese tonight, or whatever it might be, and you're gone. And the fact that you've got a focus in the room, it must be, yeah. Coaching being an art is a good line, Amy. You're right. That's a good point. Other thoughts and feelings about what you've heard and questions will be also great. Hayley, coming in, thanks.
Yeah, I'd just be really interested to know Stephen and Lucy's views on obtaining feedback and also using profiles within coaching. When do you think it has a role, and maybe when not?
I'm going to give
Stephen, go first.
You took the answers. So what was the first half of the question? Hayley, remind me, sorry.
Obtaining feedback from kind of peers, teams, managers.
So feedback is in part of the coaching process.
Yeah. So what role do you think it plays?
Yeah, it really be useful. For me, it's always been different by assignment. My preference, so I normally lean into, which is I like to do a short number of verbal 360s with relevant people to get the right data. And I don't use tools for that. My recommendation is always give me the people you want me to speak to. I'll arrange 6 30-minute, 45-minute phone calls or whatever it needs to be. I'll ring up their peer group, whoever they've identified, and say, right, it's confidential. I'll write a report on the back of that and then use that for part of the feedback that will help us at the beginning to set the goals. So normally it's a pre-piece. What I've done with a couple of big corporates was then bulk that into a kind of a scorecard at the same time, which is this is where we are today when we begin the assignment. And at the back end, we'll do a scorecard again in terms of looking at progress for the individual. Normally at that point, I just ask the line manager, the person that's commissioned me in essence to do it, to remark the scorecard with the individual. But on a couple of occasions, we've asked for the peer group to add some of that feedback in again, not in another 360, just in a simple grid of, we'd like to know how you see them doing against this to see if we can measure that progress. Because probably some of my best assignments have been where we've properly set up a scorecard at the beginning and at the end, able to measure it to say that has worked. We've made the progress we wanted on these things. And it can be as simple as self and manager assessment and then same at the end of it. And you said profiles do you mean as in psychometrics or?
Yes, yeah. So whether it's DISC or insights, etc.
I struggled with this a lot when I first got qualified because I was like, there's so many you can use, and organizations have their preferences as well. I have a short list of kind of 7 or 8 that I use, which I'm qualified in, have gone and been trained on, done all the things I needed to do to use them kind of with confidence and know that I'm getting the best out of them. But equally, I've had clients who've said, an HRD that said to me, we don't use those. We think that might confuse matters. Can you just take the results from these and use that as part of your piece? And I've respectfully said, sure, okay. And we've always found the middle ground to do it. So I think there's always a role. Some clients don't want any. My recommendation is always we'll do 2 or 3 things just to give a slightly wider sense at the beginning. I use them though for the individual. So it's more for a stimuli for my client to be able to know a little bit more about themselves as we open up conversations, to just have different lenses themselves to use to go, oh yes, I understand why I might behave that way or do that way. It kind of gives a richness to the conversation for me.
What do you think, Lucy?
I think I'll tell you a tale of where something's gone wrong, because it's more about the psychological safety with feedback and dynamics. So I was in an executive group, so CEO and 4 executive directors, and we had a coach, one who coached the CEO and then another coach who coached the rest of the executive directors. But then they would also do the development sessions. And what it meant was we didn't have the feeling of psychological safety, that what you were talking about in your coaching sessions was being replayed into the development sessions, but it wasn't done in a way that made you feel safe. So therefore started to impact on how you open and honest and transparent you were being in your coaching sessions for yourself. And eventually what it felt like was it was all about how we're helping the CEO become a better person, as opposed to the group dynamics and everything else that we're supposed to focus in on. So I think it's about how it's set up and how you're clear on the parameters at the beginning and the safeguards you put in place, that any coaching session is entirely confidential, but how you agree the feedback's brought in or the profiling is brought back in is really important as part of it.
Does that help you?
Thank you. Yes, definitely. Really useful. Thanks.
Any other points people would like to raise or ask?
I think Amy's got a question in the chat. I don't know if you've responded.
Oh, sorry, I missed that.
So
Oh,
Can
yes.
someone read that if that's okay? It's
Yeah, I
just,
can. Yeah, sorry, Amy. Thanks, Lucy. I informally coach my team members, managers, and leaders. However, do you have any advice on how you navigate the often expressed concern if you work in HR, you can't be independent and therefore coach employees? Thanks.
That's a great question. I'm only laughing because I recognize it so consistently. It's really hard to coach within your own organization. Really hard. When I was at TJX, they formalized it. They tackled it and said, we're going to train a number of people who can be HR and non-HR people, properly trained, probably set up, and then they would be matched really carefully with people who they didn't really know in the organization, didn't come across most, because especially in HR, you're always viewed as, well, you know stuff that you know, and it's going to be shared and used. But also it's really difficult to be objective when you're in an organization and you know the context and the tone of some things. It helps, and then it completely doesn't help, because you'll have some limiting assumptions you have to take with you when you do it. I now don't offer coaching in the organizations where I'm a CHRO. I'll do day-to-day coaching. So I'll do day-to-day coaching with all the help with stuff, but I wouldn't do a formalized set of sessions with one of my co-directors or the level below, because I have too much knowledge, influence, thoughts, assumptions, etc., that swirl around me that wouldn't be fair, wouldn't allow me to do the job properly, to be honest. So I hire externally for those assignments.
Interesting. Lucy?
I think again, it comes back to the parameters. So where I have done it internally with my peers or with my CEO, it's because it's either for a specific problem that you know you can make an immediate impact on because you know the situation, or you have to really delineate the lines. So I've just recently coached somebody in the parks who's my own peer level, and I've had to almost go, forget that you know that insight, forget that you know that knowledge, because you have no right to share it with anyone outside of that coaching session. It's entirely for them. They had a massive aha type moment, but that's their moment. And you've almost then got to forget. So it comes back to Stephen's point around, if you're going to do it, be really firm on your lines as to how strong a coaching model it is. If it's informal day to day, that's very different to, we're going to do 6 sessions, have a goal, and this is what we're trying to achieve from it, I think.
Let us know in the chat what you think, Amy. I'm just wondering whether you can, because I know you're, open plan. Well, I think you're mute.
It's because of this. Hello.
Oh, yeah. Hello.
No, I think that's really useful, and it's definitely something that I experience. So I think there needs to be that sort of clear division. Um, as I said, I can do it informally, but I think if it's the case of, right, here you go, here's your 6 sessions, I think we need to identify someone else within the business who can actually do that, because it's about that relationship between coachee and coach, and there has to be that trust. Thanks.
My favourite subject when I learned coaching was boundaries, weirdly. I found it fascinating, I still do, because it can be applied in so many ways. And you mentioned it earlier, Richard, not getting distracted by, starting to have a conversation, something, and you've got a bit of experience and it takes you off on a common ground, or it could be the boundaries of within a workplace because you are wanting to provide a bit of coaching, but you have that knowledge, as Lucy says, trying to let go or remember not to remember those things from another conversation. And it could be the one end of the spectrum, which is at what point, you're not a psychologist, you're not a psychiatrist, and you have to be able to stop at some point. With some sessions go, I'm not qualified to talk about this and deal with this, and you need to go and seek medical help. And the boundaries, we spent a couple of sessions on it when I did my training, and it still to this day fascinates me. And it fascinates me because I think a lot of coaches get it wrong, and it's quite a dangerous thing to get wrong, because you can mislead people or give them bad advice or be taken the wrong way. It's never ending, and it's a really important subject. I think all coaches should remember and think about it. What are the boundaries of the session and their own skills, etc.? And it's more prevalent, as Amy says, in a business that you're already in it and you've got people that you're working alongside every day. It probably has another level of risk.
Yes, got you. Yeah, nice summary. Can I just ask, Lucy and Stephen, you both mentioned 2 things that you could each explore. One was, Lucy, your question was, how does coaching neurodivergent leaders and colleagues differ? Which I think is a really apposite one. And Stephen, you were saying, should I study coaching? Why, where, what does it mean if I do? That sort of thing. So, because we've got a bit of time left, I just wonder if I could turn to Lucy and ask your thoughts on that subject, because it's a great one.
So my passion area is learning more about neurodiversity at the moment, and in particular, I'm studying for a qualification for coaching people with ADHD. And as we know more about it, 1 in 7 people in the workplace will have some form of ADHD. So you are now going to have a whole range of people understanding more about how their brain works and neurodiversity in the workplace. The UK only started to diagnose people with ADHD in 2008. So if you think about how long it's taking for us to catch up to really understand what it means and how it plays through, there is a lot in the business we need to really start to understand. And in particular with ADHD, it impacts on something in your brain known as the executive functioning, and impacts it by about 30%. And it's the type of thing that helps you do timekeeping, helps you remember deadlines, helps you prioritize, and it impacts it in different ways for different people. So when you're coaching somebody with ADHD, and we were just saying, one example is they'll go off on all different tangents because that's how their brain works. It's got like 1,000 tabs open all at once, and they don't know which one's pinging, which one they're going for. And that's why the conversation can go off in 101 directions. So therefore, when you're coaching, thinking about how the ADHD is present for your person, how it's going to turn up and how it's going to show in the coaching session is really important to partner with right at the beginning. So if they're not great at timekeeping, they're probably not going to show up for your coaching session on time. So how long do you give them before actually you say, no, this is it? So I've had somebody where I've tried to set up a coaching session 3 times now and they haven't turned up to any of it because their brain is just not able to cope with, they haven't got the tools in place for them to be able to get to that point. And we're having a very open and honest conversation around, actually, can you do this? Can you turn up? Because it's my time, your time, and respect for each other. And part of the real nub of it is they want coaching to be able to manage that. So how do we get around that catch-22 where they can't even turn up to the coaching session because how their ADHD is playing out? Or to your point of silence, for people with ADHD, they can't cope with silence because there's so much noise going on in their brain that actually the silence is far more triggering for them. It starts to create something called rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which for people with ADHD, they feel rejection so much more than people who don't have ADHD. So silence for them can also be you're rejecting them because you're not interjecting into the conversation. So there are so many different ways where we've been trained classically in a coaching model, which as we understand more about how the brain functions, we are going to have to adapt our coaching styles to it. But it's not about being worried and not understanding that. It's actually, as you set up the session, how can I best partner with you today? So how can I best be present for you? How can I best work with you? How busy is your brain today? Do we need to think and focus? Do you actually need the time limits? All these types of things come back to setting off those really great questions at the beginning. And so my just ask as people go into the coaching world, start thinking about how neurodiversity is coming into play, because it will make you think about how you need to play with some of your coaching models and maybe the people in front of you, how you might need to partner with them differently as we go through.
Thanks ever so much for raising that point. I'm really glad you suggested that, Lucy. That's very interesting. Just pause there for questions or points that you'd like to raise or ask Lucy.
As you're thinking, I'm having quite a few conversations with my HR team around, would we have disciplined people in the olden days if we'd known this now?
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I bet. Nick, you trying to come in?
Well, I'll just to say, I think I might now have ADHD, so thanks because the silence thing is, I mean, I don't really, but I think, it's something that we tell our managers when they are investigating, actually, if you are waiting for somebody to say something, actually, you want to be able to hear from them, and it will give that person the opportunity. They might have cut themselves off before they're about to say something, and actually kind of giving them the space to do that. But I like what you were saying about actually, if someone does have ADHD, what that will do and how they will feel in that moment, and then how they might act in that situation. So I think that that's, important, not just in a coaching thing, but actually you've mentioned here around disciplinaries. And I think actually that's given me quite a lot to think about in the way that we approach supporting people through those processes and how it can impact the other work that we're doing. So thank you for that.
Having 1,000 tabs open is a really nice visual way of understanding ADHD as well, Lucy, like that.
Yeah.
And Stephen, sorry, turning to you, because you were raising this idea about should I study coaching? If so, where? What will it mean if I do? I think was another.
Yeah, I mean, I bumped into this, God, 10 years ago and asked myself 3 questions, which was what I wanted to do some development as a CPO, and I was kind of looking for what would that look like, and coaching was always something I loved, and so kind of said, will it help the business? Will it help me in my role? And then will it help me professionally longer term? And I kind of got a yes on all 3, and I went, okay, it's worth it. I think it's and I think Lucy and I are probably both in the same camp with this, which is it's an amazing thing to do, right? It's so rewarding, both just doing the training, but then beyond the training, doing all the work I've done since has been some of the most enjoyable time as an HR practitioner, if you can still call yourself that as a coach, just superb. What I was going to line out just very simply was the kind of the stages to it as I saw it and see it. If you think about doing it, one is finding a provider that you think is going to give you the kind of quality of learning, and we should all be in our professions pretty good at spotting those, I think, by now. Lucy did Henley, which is I looked at Henley and Myler Campbell in London, tossed up between the two, ended up doing Myler Campbell just for logistics more than anything else. But there's 2 or 3 or 4 really, really strong places you can go and learn at these days, and I'd recommend all of them, having checked them out. So you need to do that learning piece. You then have to do practice, which will feel mind-bendingly uncomfortable at times and awkward, but is brilliant because you have to put in X number of 1,000 hours, 100 hours, or whatever it is your course goes is. You need to do this many hours of coaching. You find people to practice coach. Then a lot of people then go from that to being accredited, and there's 3 or 4 good places to be accredited now by as well, like the EMCC and the ICF. Some courses have that bolted in, some don't have it bolted in, some have it connected, and you have to do something else. But that adds something else that certainly a good organisation will ask you for potentially as a coach to understand the quality of what you've done. Then you get the question of supervision. How do I remain supervised as a coach to make sure I'm practicing responsibly? I think that's essential. So when I hire coaches, one of my first questions is, can you tell me about your supervision, please? Because unsurprisingly, a lot of coaches don't. Then you have an ongoing continuous professional development, which is how do you maintain your knowledge to maintain your levels as a coach. And then, of course, just the hours of coaching that you do after that as a fully qualified. So it's the reason why I did mention it was there's a lot to it. And I've had a lot of colleagues and friends over the years who've jumped in, done the training, which is in its own right brilliant, and then kind of stopped and gone, that was brilliant, I'm a coach. And it kind of, that's just the start. And it's so much you should be putting into it to help it become what it needs to become longer term, all of which is thoroughly worthwhile, in my opinion, and worth doing if you're passionate about it. I say it just to forewarn people, don't be surprised by how it mushrooms open to much, much more if you want to maintain that as a skill and as a profession going forward.
Thanks, Stephen. I think your last point was what impact might it have on buying in coaches from my organisation?
Well, yeah, I mean, and weirdly, one of the reasons I really wanted to do it was because I was hiring coaches and I wanted to be able to ask better questions of coaches. And I wanted to be able to do a service for my business that I could say, these are. And I was like, what better way to be able to choose a coach than to become one and understand what good and bad can look like? And what I learned through training, I don't know if Lucy would say the same, I learned so much in training about what bad coaching is as well. Did it help me identify as a CPO what to look for, what questions to ask? Because it's an unregulated business with millions of people saying they're a coach, and it's a minefield out there, actually. And I've met people who've had coaching from people that aren't coaches, and it's not good. So as a CPO, I want to be able to do my job properly and be able to say to my executive leaders, yes, I vetted this. This is a good decision. Now it's just about chemistry.
Nice. Makes sense. Any final thoughts? We'd love to hear reactions to that. Questions for Stephen or Lucy? Questions from Lucy to Stephen? Questions from Stephen to Lucy?
When are the Christmas lights going on in the gardens, Lucy? Do you have any?
Winter Wonderland is being built right now, so Winter Wonderland will soon be open.
Excellent.
Didn't see that one coming, but good question.
Stephen, I guess this one for me is that whenever I've looked at things like the ICF or the ACA, it's so complicated to try and understand which is the right path or what level you should go to. Have you got any hints or tips for anybody who might be thinking going down that path?
Oh, nice.
So my one man's judgment maybe. We did a couple of sessions on them at the end of my training just to try and debunk some stuff. And a peer group I'm still part of agreed it doesn't matter which one you go for. Ultimately, if it's one of the established brands, I think it's more that people want to see that you are applying, because accreditation requires you to have done even more hours, even more CPD regularly, etc. So it's almost like saying this person is continuing their progress on a coaching journey. I chose the EMCC because my training provider had a connection to it, and therefore some of it was pre-built as part of the qualification. So it was a light lift to get me to the first level. And then I've taken it to senior associate, I think it is, which is maybe the second or third level. And I had to go and prove my stuff, right? I had to go and take my CPD, and so I quite like that, held me to account a bit. But I don't think it matters. I think the ICF, EMCC is a couple more, which I can't remember. I think they're all pretty good, and people seem to have a favorite based on how they do it, as opposed to what they do. I think they all do kind of the same thing. I've not really looked at it for a while, but when I did my assessment, it was kind of, which one works for me, I'll be honest.
What do you think, Lucy?
So I am still with the ICF and the ACA, and I keep debating which is the one, and I can't give up either because I'm like, well, I've got them now. And so I'm paying double, and I'm like, this is really stupid, and I should give one of them up. But I can't in my head work out which is the better one to do or not do, or the value it gives to you. And I think that's part of the difference as well, isn't it?
I think the ICF, my experience with the ICF has become feels far more globally recognized. I work around the world a lot, and that's the one that always comes up first in my experience.
Okay. Interesting. Well, thanks everyone. Really nice to see you all. Lucy and Stephen, I really appreciate the care and the effort you put into that. There's some really interesting thoughts and insights. I've learned a lot myself. I'm sure the group have as well. Very nice to see you. We've got another Experts at Work tomorrow. We'll see you again soon. And just to say again, Lucy and Stephen, thank you ever so much. Really good hearing from you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, and lovely to see you all. Bye.